Hello and welcome to our bonus content following our October 19th, 2022 Reserve Study Q&A session. And this is another opportunity for us to share answers to the questions that so many webinar attendees submitted. Today, in this session, I'm going to address funding plan questions. Make sure you also bookmark and review the other bonus content videos that we've created for general questions, components, insurance and investment, inflation, legislation, and some miscellaneous questions. So let me get right to it, right to the funding plan questions. So first one, is a reserve funding plan which targets percent funded with special assessments as needed acceptable? I don't like that. Question goes on, for various reasons our association is unlikely to fully fund our reserves. However, the HOA has always agreed to fund needed expenses to maintain the building long term. Okay, so it sounds like everyone's on board with paying the bills. They are a little reluctant to fully fund reserves. And how about balancing ongoing reserve funding with special assessments? My reaction is special assessments are always risky. Will they pass or not? Number two, the board is responsible to maintain the assets of the association, not budget for only paying part of the bill, and then hoping that the homeowners will respond affirmatively when asked to kick in a bunch of extra money. So the board's responsible to budget for the needs of the association. Special assessments are inherently unfair. They put the entire burden of the expense on the homeowners who live there at the time of the expense. And bottom line is the costs are the same. The roof fails one way or the other. So you're not saving homeowners any money by keeping the reserve funding low. They're going to get hit with it, the bill as a special assessment. So it's in the homeowner's best interest to spread out that funding evenly over all the homeowners, and that way everyone pays their fair share. You're not saving anyone money. The roof is still going to fail. The bill is still going to be there. You might as well collect it on an ongoing basis. Next one. The current board majority, 3 out of 5, voted to withdraw $50,000 from reserves to upgrade the front yard landscaping. Okay? The expenditure is not in the reserve study. That's a key problem. And the existing reserve funding does not take it into account, of course, because it wasn't in reserves. And we will go into the high-risk category. Your thoughts? Well, agreed. Unplanned spending of reserves weakens the reserve fund, making it less prepared for all your other reserve projects and significantly increasing your special assessment risk and the risk of projects not getting done on time, which means deferred maintenance and potentially higher overall costs due to scope creep when you get extra deferred maintenance. So a bad idea overall, but it is what it is. Contact your reserve study provider and adjust your reserve funding plan so at least you can get back on balance. Question. Sometimes the estimates in the reserve study are not in line with our bids. How do you explain that? Well, I'm sorry that you have that stereotype, but yes, sometimes that does happen, and it's generally for two reasons. One is because the reserve study was not prepared by a credentialed reserve expert. That's someone with RS or PRA behind their name. The other major reason is because it's a reserve study that's a few years old. You can imagine that if it's even 3 years old, it missed all the last 2+ years of pandemic, supply chain problems, high inflation, all that kind of stuff. And it would not surprise me that most, if not all, of the costs in the reserve study are significantly underestimated. So the person who's doing it and the how old the reserve study is. Next question. We all want our reserves 100% funded. Are there hard and fast rules in California for the percent of funding? Well, good for you to understand that fully funded, 100% funding is a good aspirational goal. It's a great goal. Are there hard and fast rules in California for percent funded? No. Is there a firmly recommended threshold? I can tell you that what we see in the industry is special assessments are almost absent when an association's reserve fund is at or above the 70% level. So that's where you want to be. You want to be above 70% level, aim for the 100% level. How fast do we need to get back to fully funded if we drop back to 80%? That should not be a problem. Dropping from 100% down to 80% should not be a big deal. Just be part of the reserve plan and restore the strength of your reserve fund. Okay. Question. Please provide the importance or lack of importance of the percent funded calculation that's provided in reserve studies. This is one of those crazy questions. Some people think it's black magic. I'm on the side that believes it's a key indicator. Let me explain the difference. Clearly it is a key indicator. Percent funded unquestionably gives a overall health of, not health, but size and perspective of the reserve fund. Is it a perfect indicator? No. It's like blood pressure or your cholesterol level. You want your numbers to be good. It doesn't guarantee health. It doesn't guarantee poor health. But it is one of those prime indicators that's going to help you know if your reserve fund is effectively sized to the needs of the association. Can you provide an average assessment amount for I'm going to imagine a reserve assessment amount for a 70-unit condominium that's 12 years old? Answer is no. That's what a reserve study does. But I can say that typical reserve funding is in the 15 to 40% of total budget range. So if you're in the 15 to 40% range, you're at least in the right ballpark. And hopefully when you get your updated reserve study, you won't be too surprised that you'll have to make a big, well, let me say it differently. You likely won't have to make a big change. Okay? Question, is there any restrictions other than majority vote of board members? Some associations need board member votes, some associations need homeowner votes to remove funds to cover non-scheduled reserve projects. For example, an accident destroyed our playground area, which is not due for reserve funding for another 5 years. Number one, I'm sorry to hear. Unfortunate things happen. Reserves are the field of estimating. And so this is going to be a good time for you to, we said it many times, you need to speak to your outside counsel. In this case, your attorney counsel and your insurance agent. Find out if it's covered, how much of it is covered through insurance, and what your governing documents say about who can authorize an expenditure of funds. Basically, it's the board's job to care for the assets of the association. So if something failed early, everything else being equal, and let's say insurance didn't cover it, pay for it with your reserves and update your reserve study with new useful life and remaining useful life information for the, playground area. Question. Our residential association is now facing an unforeseen project with cash costs about equal to a full year's operating budget. Our reserve fund is about 130% of that amount. Okay, so they have about 1.3 years of their annual budget in reserves. Okay, if we spend the money, that'll leave our reserves underfunded. Absolutely. When you spend reserves for projects that weren't anticipated, it's going to suck your reserves down. The unforeseen project has a useful life of 25 years. Current owners say, why should they absorb the entire cost currently for future owner benefit? Is there a way to spread the cost more equitably? What I don't see in this question is when the project is supposed to occur. I hear it's 25-year life. I don't know if it's immediate or 24 years yet away. So, number one, it's a huge project. Anything close to a full year's operating budget is clearly a huge project. So number one, discuss with your reserve study provider, find out how that fits into your reserve plan, adjust the reserve plan, and so you'll know how to begin preparing for that project. Now, a key thing that I want to point out, they said, how do you collect funds for the benefit of future owners? in reserves, you're never collecting funds for the benefit of future owners. All you're doing with reserves is offsetting ongoing deterioration. If there's anyone that benefits from the reserve funding situation, it's prior owners who got by scot-free or by underfunding. They're the ones who are leaving responsibility for current owners and future owners. It's always prior owners that got away underpaying. So yeah, current owners are not paying for future owners. Current owners are generally paying for the mistakes and under reserving, mistakes of board members and under reserving of prior owners. Okay, our current reserve funding level is 25% of total budget. Good, you're in the right range. Our board is trying to manage regular assessments versus special assessments, along with regular uses of reserve funds as a course of business, knowing that some large items are expected to fully depreciate in the next 3 to 4 years. Okay, so you've got some large projects in the next 3 to 4 years. How should we set goals and priorities to manage and build our reserves? Currently, we are targeting increasing the reserves by minimally 3 percentage points per year. Okay, too much details. I'm going to say update your reserve study, contact your reserve study professional. There is no need to guess. There's no need to get an answer to this type of question from a free video from a webinar that was free. Contact your reserve study provider, update your plan, and see what it takes. You got to find out. There's no guessing with this. But good for you to at least be at 25% of total budget going towards reserves. What percent increase will you be using, or are you using, as a current cost estimate in 2023 reserve studies? And do you see any scenario where you would recommend reducing annual reserve contributions in 2023 over 2022? Okay, let me make sure I'm answering this correctly. Our reserve study costs, our costs to perform a reserve study, are a little bit higher than last year simply due to staffing costs, and inflation is real. With respect to reserve funding, a ballpark figure of what we're recommending this year for a client over last year is anywhere 10 to 20% higher. And again, inflation is real. So now the key is, if the client last had the reserve study 3 years ago, we're likely going to recommend a funding increase more than 10 or 20%, because they've got multiple years of high inflation to catch up with. So it may be 20% to 50%. Okay, is there a rule of thumb for the typical replacement reserve percentage of the operating budget? I think I've said it before just moments ago. Most associations responsibly funding the reserves need to be in the 15 to 40% range. That's what it takes to offset ongoing deterioration. That's a pretty safe number, and actually 25% is pretty much the peak of what, if you draw a curve, 15% on one side, 40% on the other side. The peak, most associations need to be in the 25% range. If you ask me what you need to be, I'd say do 25% of total budget. That'll get you close. Okay, we put contributions in our monthly operations budget that we have been doing, but we also expect to have excess funds in operation at the end of the year. Good for you. Got a cash positive budget. Can we just transfer this excess to the reserves, since our reserve study shows we are underfunded, I should say like most associations, to help get our reserves funded stronger? And will this also allow us to avoid paying taxes on those excess funds? Okay. Anything you can do to strengthen your reserve fund, moving excess operational funds over, it's like an additional reserve transfer. So do it. But make sure to clear this with your accounting professional and tax professional. Generally, reserve funds are set aside tax-free year over year, but then generally minor operational expenses are also tax-free. So that should not be a big deal, but clear that. Update your reserve study, because with a nice higher reserve balance, that may have a good effect on minimizing your reserve needs next year and in the reserves to follow. And again, talk to your accounting and tax professional. Okay, we're looking at a significant quarterly increase to comply with our reserve study, calling for a basic increase from $29,000 to $42,000, plus a special assessment of $250,000 for the year. Okay, this place operates on a quarterly basis rather than monthly or annual. No big deal. But it sounds like their reserve study recommended a significant increase from $29,000 per quarter to $42,000 per quarter. Okay, is it possible to increase quarterly assessments to $60,000 to avoid the special assessment? Great question. Let's see. The special assessment of $250,000 was recommended. You're saying if we put another $20,000 per quarter, that's 20 times 4 is 80. So you get to $250,000 in about 3 years, if I'm doing the math right. 80, 160, 240. So in about 3 years at this higher reserve funding rate, could you avoid the special assessment? Well, it all depends on the timing. If your roof is leaking now, you need a special assessment now to replace the roof now. So speak to your reserve study professional. If the expense is, let's say, 5 years away, then sure, you don't particularly need a special assessment now. You could spread that reserve funding need over a little bit longer time. Okay, last question. We're facing an unforeseen expense on the scale of 100% of our annual operating budget. We just answered something like this a moment ago. The item has a useful life of 20 to 25 years. We have the reserves to pay for it without a special assessment. Well, good for you. Sounds like they have a nice reserve fund that can tolerate a big expense of about a year's annual expenses. Reserve funding never relieves, okay. But some owners chafe at the idea of current owners paying for future owners' benefits. Boy, that's a recurring theme here. How can that 20 to 25 year cost be spread more equitably to include future owners? Well, that's a whole point. As I said earlier, discuss with your reserve study provider to dial it into the plan. And like I said earlier, reserve funding never pays for the expenses of future owners. Reserve funding regularly pays for the under-reserving of prior owners. They're the ones who got away putting aside less than their fair share. So that brings us to the end of this session here. And I want to remind you to look for our other bonus content videos: general, components, insurance, investment, inflation, legislation, and miscellaneous. But thank you very much, and I'll have some more of those sections for you ready for you to watch.